Welcome to Queen of the Sungrown YouTube. I'm super excited to have my guest today. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Aixa. My full name's Aixarret, but I just go by Aixa. And I'm co-founder of Mycelium Matters, and we are an organization that's dedicated to spreading awareness on all the applications of fungi, regardless of your age, your ethnicity, your income. We try to make mushroom education accessible to everybody anywhere. Yeah, we launched this initiative a couple weeks ago, and I have been working tirelessly with amazing experts and researchers and professionals. And it's important to realize that this is new research. Like, there has been hardly too much research that's been done. You know, the Maui Bioremediation Group is making huge strides and efforts to remediate what happened in Lahaina. And it's all experimental. It's observational studies, experimental studies, and there's kind of no proof that any of this works. It's more the idea and that we know that fungi have this potential, and it's all about figuring out what works and what doesn't. So I think just like understanding that right now, I wouldn't recommend anyone just throwing oyster mushrooms in their backyard. We do not want to introduce non-native species. It's like extremely important to understand the ecology, versus just thinking that mushrooms can save the world. Although they can, and the idea is that they can, we have to go about this in ecologically correct manner and hold integrity for these wildlands instead of just thinking that these are going to solve all our problems.
A lot of the reasons these fires get so out of hand is because of invasive species that were brought in to California, like the eucalyptus tree that just lights up. It is so highly flammable. And native species in California evolved with fire, like the lodgepole pine. The seeds won't release until it reaches 175 degrees Fahrenheit. So I think that what you guys are doing is amazing. I love that focus on ecological species first, instead of just like an initiative of let's find that fungus that remediates the most. But no, let's focus on what's there. So what are specific, besides the oysters, which plant species and fungi species are you using? So you mentioned the native buckwheat, which we love buckwheat in the Queen of the Sun-grown world. And then oysters, native oysters. Are there any other species that you want to highlight?
I think it's important to highlight that we are doing two different experiments. We are experimenting that oyster with native uptaking plants that take up toxins, like, the California sagebrush, the purple sage, the California brittlebush, and the California buckwheat. These are all known to, stabilize soils, help with erosion control, which is something that's really devastating after fires, is the erosion that happens in the soil, which is something that we do not want because that does not promote biodiversity. And in many cases, the classic cleanups are just digging a big hole in the ground, taking all of that out and throwing it into a landfill. And that kind of just ruins all the natural microorganisms that are already in that soil. So the goal with that is to be able to learn how we can utilize nature's natural remedies to uptake toxins that weren't supposed to be there, especially in residential areas. I would leave the wildlands alone because they have natural processes on how to remediate. That's where a lot of the fire-falling fungi come up. But in terms of residential areas, it's a way harder for nature to naturally remediate those areas because of these non-organic toxins that are in the soil. Some other native fire-falling fungi that are native to the California. So we're going to do an experiment on oysters on native plants, and then native fire-falling fungi alongside native plants as well. So it's two different experiments that we're trying to see what works best and what does not work. And my hypothesis is that the native fire-following fungi alongside the native toxin uptaking plants will probably uptake most of the toxins. So things like Pyronema, it's a fungi that thrives in nutrient-poor soils, and Neurosporsa crassa. It's a super rapid colonizer of like freshly burned areas. And then Morchella, morels, these are known to pop up in fire affected areas and places that have recently burned. And I also think it's important to note that in a lot of these residential areas, controlled burns are not a thing. Indigenous people have been practicing controlled burns for centuries, even before, colonialism started establishing homes and completely left controlled fire burns out of the picture. But little did they know is that those were necessary to keep large wildfires like this from happening. So I think it's always really important to look back at indigenous practices of maintaining the land because they were able to live on there for so long without these devastating fires completely overtaking their colonies and their areas where they lived. But I think that's also a huge issue, is the lack of indigenous wisdom that we, as people who are establishing in these large scale residential areas that used to be filled with native plant species and different types of native fungal species, completely getting overtaken by buildings and cement, and nobody's clearing the brush anymore because that's not of importance, or no one's doing controlled burns anymore, because how are they going to do that in a residential area? But it is necessary, and I think leaning into that wisdom is something that I've been doing a lot recently, researching how indigenous people used fire-following fungi, and were able to identify areas where there was burns and left them alone, or did controlled burns on areas where there wasn't fire-following fungi. So it's really interesting. The more I'm getting deeper into this initiative, the more I'm personally learning about the indigenous history and their practices to keep the land stable.
That's amazing. Well, I'm really excited to see what kind of data you guys collect. How long, like, what's the time frame for this? You're getting funding right now. When do you plan on starting these trials?
Yeah, so right now, the first 1 to 4 weeks, we're pretty much getting all our permits and compliances in order with local agencies. We're doing like buffer zones around these sites to make sure there's no radiation in the area. Let's say if a dentist's office burned down in Altadena, like, we must be extremely careful and analyze. So it's a lot of different tests and analyzations. Our core team members are going through HazPower certifications to be able to work with hazardous materials. So there's a lot of like things we need to get in order before we even actually start conducting the research. And one of them is also funding for these testings. We do have a field survey coming up in the springtime to examine native fire-falling fungi that are already reaching, wildlands where there's not any residential homes or anything like that, to naturally observe what kind of fungus is already growing on these burn sites. And a lot of them like to grow on, burned wood and charcoal and ash. So I'm really excited about the field survey, but right now it's pretty much getting all of our permits in order, all of our, material procurements, which fortunately we have an amazing safety lead, Armando, who owns the American Fungi Company and Standard Planet, who's helping us secure all of our PPE. And I think it's really important for people to understand you can't just go out there, without any PPE on. Like, this is super hazardous material. And I think a lot of people don't, forget that because they aren't familiar. There's not a lot of education out there on like what these asbestos can cause people or what's actually going into your lungs. But that's kind of the first step of our initiative. In the next couple, I think by like the 4th or 6th month, it would be when we're actually implementing this remediation. So I've been talking to a couple of researchers about different ways to implement this. And one of our things is inoculated burlap bags to, stabilize the soil and introduce the fungi. So that's kind of one of our main ways to introduce the fungus, and then also planting the native toxin uptaking plant species alongside with the fungal deployment. And this will, help stabilize the soil. It'll promote biodiversity with, hopefully with a mix of ground cover, shrubs, and, different types of erosion control species like the plant species that I mentioned. And then after that, we'd just be monitoring the fungal colonization and seeing what plants are surviving, documenting the progress in our observation logs. And hopefully by, the 6th to 12th month, we'll be able to perform a post-remediation soil and water test to assess the toxin reduction and hopefully the soil recovery. I think my main concern is trying to do this before the rains come, because when rains come and wash on all of these toxic sites, that's going to directly affect our waterway systems and it's going to turn into runoff. So we're moving as fast as we possibly can, but in the most ecologically correct way. We don't want to harm the environment more than it's already been harmed.
Let's meet back up. Let's make a plan so that once you have your first set of test results back, I would love to do another interview so we can see, like, not your first test, but your second test. So we can compare the two after you've implemented. I would love to hear about this and keep my followers and listeners, everyone updated, because I think this work that you're doing is so important. And I'm just thrilled to live in a time that we're seeing these kinds of initiatives, these kinds of projects happening where we're working with nature, in tune to Mother Nature instead of trying to manipulate her, and to the detriment of our species and those around us. So, how can everyone listening help support what you have going on and follow along?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone listening has experience in fire following fungi, I think it's super important to be involved in any initiatives like Danielle's Applied Center for Ecological Remediation that we are forming a coalition for. So if anyone has any expertise in the area who wants to be involved, I think that is what's really necessary. And of course, funding, if you have any experience in grant writing, let's say, or if you have the funds to be able to donate some of that, because research is extremely expensive. 1 acre site is probably going to run us like 75,000 from what Danielle Stevenson projected. And Maya Elson said this project would be anywhere from lowest 100K to, who knows. But it's important that this work is done to further the research. And yeah, I think that's probably one of the things we need the most help with is the funding for this. And luckily, we have an amazing team already looking for grants, already writing, applying for those grants, already creating pitch decks for, funders who have money to be able to fund like these sort of philanthropic efforts. But yeah, you can reach us at Mycelium Matters if you want to sign up. I would go to our website and under our wildfire remediation initiative, you can put your email, your name, and then just email us or send that in, and we'll get back to you. I'm in the process of planning like a full email send out just because of the massive amount of amazing feedback, which is so incredible. But unfortunately, I'm only one person. I wish I was like 30. Uh, but yeah, fortunately, we've been getting a lot of aid, and I think all hands on board is just going to further this research and help us be able to fund it. And I think it's really important and necessary. And I really also appreciate you for, giving us this platform to talk about our work. And I think it's super helpful that people like you with the same mission and kind of the same goals and knowledge are furthering this to your audience and to other people who might see this. It's super important. Like the work is one thing, but getting other people to learn about it and know about it and care about it is a whole entire other thing that's also super important.
Well, you're like a mycelium. We're connecting and we're growing out and we're myceliating the collective consciousness of the world. So
Very true.
that's my goal anyway.
I love that.
So I'm really thrilled to have you. Thank you so much for taking your time. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be teaching a class in San Diego on March 8th. And I'll have a QR code where people can donate if they feel called to. And we'll give a portion of the profit of the class, send it over to you guys. Because like I said, so many people lost everything. Growers, gardeners, families, high and low. It's affected all socioeconomic backgrounds, demographics. And I know that there are a ton of people out there who will benefit from this project because like those things that you're talking about, asbestos and the heavy metals, like those things accumulate and cause cancer, fertility issues. There's so many far-reaching impacts on our human health, and not only just the ecological health, but like our neighbors and our loved ones. So I'm thrilled to be able to help in any way that I can.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad we're aligned. Like you said, we're all the mycelial network. And that's something that I keep hearing with everybody that I keep talking to. They're like, we're just all finding where to get the resources on where, who needs it, and how we can help. And I love that. I love that analogy. And I feel like it's so true. And as like a fungal lover, it's so aligning.
It is. Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing from you again in the near future.